Hey, good morning. Chad with Word and Coffee. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 9 today, talking about kind of life after the flood, after the ark had come to rest on the mountains of Ararat, and everything is kind of starting to be reestablished on the earth. So we're going to get started, and we're going to read in chapter 9, starting in verse 1. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Now, this is the third time that we see this. Adam and Eve were told to do this back in Genesis, and then back in chapter 2 of Genesis, and now we see it for the third time because they were just told this in chapter 8. And so God tells them again, Be fruitful and multiply. And the fear of you and the terror of you shall be on every beast of the earth and on every bird of the sky, with everything that creeps on the ground, and all the flesh of the sea. Into your hand they are given. Every moving thing that is alive shall be food for you. I give all to you as I gave the green plant, only you shall not eat of the flesh with its life, that is its blood. And surely I will require your lifeblood from every beast, I will require it. And from every man's brother, I will require the life of man. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about this. This is just kind of letting us know that at this point, Noah's being told, hey, the animals are going to be afraid of you from this point forward. And we don't have a record that Adam was ever told he could eat animals. We do have a record that he was told he could eat vegetation, that he could eat vegetables and fruits and things like that, grains. But we're not told that Adam could eat meat. So we don't think that he could. We think this is when man started eating meat, and God gave the animals the fear of man, to run from them, to be scared of man. Kind of made things a little more even for the animals to make sure that they weren't so easy for us to catch and kill and eat. It did give the animals a fighting chance, so to speak, and God had purposes for those animals too. He wanted them to multiply and be fruitful, not just man. He wanted every beast and bird to be fruitful and multiply, that He commanded it. And the world's drastically changed at this point. It's very different than it was prior to the flood. Probably we know that before there was, as we talked a little about yesterday, probably one big continent, and then during the flood that was all broken up, and we get the continents we have now, and mountains had started to rise, and we wound up with seasons, as we saw in verse 22. I don't think I read it yesterday, but you've got seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. So we start to see, a very different type world than we probably saw before, where the flood had changed things. And so animals, some that were probably more adapted to live in the original creation that God had made, like dinosaurs maybe, didn't do so well with climates that were, having seasons. And so maybe, that's what we see happening. We're not sure about a lot of these things. This is all some conjecture, but what we do know is that now the animals are going to be afraid of man. And then, we get down here and we see that Noah's given instructions on how to eat. So Adam's already been told about what to eat and what not to eat. Don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And he's given all these different plants and herbs and stuff to eat. But Noah has to be told what to eat. It's kind of funny that you see these instructions, and we think about it today, and eating's just part of what we do. But back then, this is foundational and fundamental on the way that God was setting up things, and what we eat is a big part of of our lives and our bodies, and how we get nutrition and how we get the vitamins and minerals we need. And so God's given these instructions to Noah on what he's supposed to do. And and Noah's listening, obviously. And I think one of the things that's interesting, it says not to, that you can eat of everything that's alive. So he's telling him, don't eat of something that you find that's been killed by another animal or died of disease. These are things that cause diseases and different things, in man, and they spread disease. So God's giving him practical instructions here. So he's telling him, and that he's not supposed to eat of something with its lifeblood still in it. So you kill an animal and you drain its blood, and then you eat it. And this isn't because of mysticism and everything. This is practical because of the fact that it does actually protect us. But secondly, it also tells us that lifeblood is something that was was precious to God. It was blood is something, it's mentioned over 400 times in the Bible. Blood is a sign of life. Blood is a sign of God's gift to us through life. I think it's interesting. This is just a little aside, but blood is that a defining factor of life and part of life in humans. And it's interesting that babies never, their blood never mixes with the mother. They have their own blood. It's a blood God gives them uniquely in the creation that they are. So I think that's neat, that even in the womb, even when their mother is carrying them, they don't ever share the blood of their mother. They have their own blood because that's a sign of their life, not of their mother's life, but of theirs. So anyway, then we come on down, and we see basically the allowance here and the creation of capital punishment. When we read in chapter 6, whoever sheds a man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed, for in the image of God he made man. So God's setting up the provisions for capital punishment. If a man murders someone else, then it allows for man, a government, a group to come together and say, this man's guilty of this, and to allow for that very thing, that very capital punishment. So, as for you, in verse 7, as for you, be fruitful and multiply, populate the earth abundantly and multiply on it. We hear a lot about overpopulation in the world today, and man, there's a lot of people. Every time I try to pull out on the highway that's not far from my house, I think, wow, we've just got a lot of people in this world. And it's amazing, just seeing the growth of the population of the earth. But that's what God told us to do, to be fruitful and multiply. And these people had some huge families and stuff back then. Moving on, in verse 8, this is something that I really want to kind of land on and talk about for a few minutes. Then God spoke to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, Now behold, I myself do establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you, of all that comes out of the ark, even every beast of the earth. And I will establish my covenant with you and with all flesh, and all flesh. There shall never be cut off by water of floods, neither shall there again be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, This is the sign of the covenant which I am making between me and you and every living creature that is with you. For all successive generations I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a sign of a covenant between me and the earth. And it shall come about that when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the bow shall be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and never again shall the water become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the cloud, then I will look upon it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. So he establishes this covenant between himself and man, and a covenant is something that is even stronger than a contract. A covenant has an initiator, which is in this case God. He initiates the covenant, and he comes and tells Noah, "This is what I'm going to do." And God's responsible for the covenant, being the initiator of it. He is responsible for making sure that the terms that he sets forth are met, and he is more responsible for that than the other person within the covenant. And that's we don't really see covenants that much anymore. What we do see is the covenant of marriage that takes place, and in that we see that a husband is required to be the covenant maker. He's the initiator of the covenant and is more responsible for the well-being of a marriage than the wife. That's not to say the wife doesn't have responsibilities, but a husband is responsible for the marriage covenant and responsible for his family because he is the initiator of that covenant and is going to be held responsible for that covenant by God. So God creates this covenant, and he says, I'm not going to destroy the earth ever again, and I'm going to set my bow, my rainbow, in the sky. And of course, we know that nowadays the rainbow has been hijacked by a group that is certainly not someone, not a group that follows the teachings of the Bible. And it's a sad thing to see that Satan has used something so beautiful that was set forth by God in order to attempt to undermine and pervert something that is a symbol of that covenant. And I think that we just so many times don't appreciate when we see a rainbow in the sky what it means. There's a couple other times, there's a few other times actually that rainbows are mentioned in the Bible. In I wrote them down. Ezekiel chapter 1 verse 28, we see that this is the vision of Ezekiel of heaven, and he's seeing things in heaven. In verse 28 of chapter 1, and Ezekiel says, "As the appearance of the rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the appearance of the surrounding radiance. Such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell on my face and heard a voice speaking." Now, he's talking about he's seeing the Lord on his throne in heaven. And then in Revelation chapter 4, verse 3, "And he who was sitting," and once again, this is John's vision of heaven, what he got to see when God allowed him to see heaven. "And he who was sitting was like jasper, stone, and a sardius in appearance. And there was a rainbow around the throne, like an emerald in appearance." So this is talking about God, and the throne, and Jesus sitting on that throne in heaven. And there's rainbows around him. Again, in Revelation chapter 10, I think, it talks about a strong angel coming down, and there being like a rainbow about his head. So what we're seeing is rainbow being a sign of authority, being a sign of incredible strength, and being a sign of sovereignty, because it's surrounding the sovereign throne of God, and God sitting on his throne of sovereignty. And in doing that, what we know about the rainbow and God setting forth that bow in the sky in chapter 9 is he has the authority to do that. He has the authority to say, I'm never going to destroy the earth again. And I'm making this covenant not just with man, but with every living thing on earth, that I'm never going to do that again. And that is really, to me, that's cool that that God, does that. That He takes, what He's just done, the destruction of all living flesh, and He says, "Hey, I'm not going to do this again." Now, it's not because God regrets what He did. God has no regrets. We've talked a little bit about some of the way that we imply our feelings onto God, and how that all works. But God knew what was going to happen, and He knew He was going to have to bring a flood. And so all of the things that happened, God knew they were going to happen. And God decided at this point, I say decided, once again, He already knew He was going to do it, but God set up the world in such a way that He shortened the span of man. He made sure that man didn't live these long, massive periods of time, that they were living before the flood. He changed so that man is eating animals, and all these things are going on. So we see that God set up a situation and a system so that the earth was not going to get back into the shape it had gotten in the first place, where everything happened and it led up to the flood. He made it so that going forward past the flood, we weren't going to have the opportunity to do the things we had done to get to that point. Now, we're eventually going to get to the point of the days of Noah. The Bible tells us, once again in Matthew, it talks about how we're going to get to that point where it's going to be like in the days of Noah. And we're headed there. We're getting there quickly. But those are some points that I wanted to bring out, that I just wanted to make mention of. There's more that goes on. Noah plants a vineyard. He starts farming. He plants a vineyard. All the things happen there with Ham, and Canaan's cursed because of their sin. We're not going to get into all of those things, but I did want to cover the idea of the rainbow, and what an incredible blessing that is, that God, whenever God puts that bow in the sky, something for us as Christians. That's a promise to us. It's promised to all mankind, actually. It's promised to all living creatures that God puts up there. So it's something that I think that we don't really, we look at a rainbow and it's pretty. A rainbow is an incredible blessing from God, and a sign of His blessing and of His covenant. So next time you see one, smile and just take solace in the fact that our Lord and our God loves us. He cares for us. He set that covenant for us, and He keeps those covenants. The covenant that He sets later on through Jesus Christ on the cross is kept in that same way that God keeps the covenant of the rainbow. And God, He's faithful, and He keeps His promises, and He keeps His covenants. And that covenant says that if we'll confess our sins and declare Jesus Christ as Lord of our lives and make Him Lord of our lives, that we will be saved. And God keeps that covenant. So that all being said, I hope you have a good day, and hopefully this was something that, like I said, will help you next time you see a rainbow to think of a wonderful God who cares and loves for us.